Welcome to Threat Post Now, Threat Post's video segment where we do deep dive interviews with cybersecurity experts about the top security threats, challenges, and trends facing businesses today. I'm joined today by Maya Horowitz, Director of Threat Intelligence Research with Check Point Research. Maya is responsible for leading the intelligence and research efforts while leveraging her team's analysis into threat prevention products. Since Maya joined Check Point almost 7 years ago, she has successfully discovered and exposed many, many new cyber threat campaigns. So Maya, thank you so much for joining me today.
Sure, great to be here. Hi, Lindsay.
Yeah, so this week CPX 360 kicks off, and I wanted to get your thoughts on some of the biggest threats that we should be on the lookout in the year ahead. I know we talked, I think it was a year ago actually, in New Orleans about what you were seeing then, and certainly a lot has changed both in the cybersecurity landscape, but also globally with the COVID-19 pandemic and everything else. So just Maya, in terms of what you're seeing, what are some of the most active cyber criminal threat groups or APT groups that we should be on the lookout for this year?
So actually, yeah, the leading malware or the leading threat group for 2020 was Emotet, and just a couple of weeks ago it was taken down. We don't know to which extent yet, but surely, at least for now, this malware is not a threat. But I guess the question is who will take the top place in our most wanted malware. And from our statistics, it looks like the answer would probably be one of the following: either 4Peaks, maybe Drydex, maybe Qbot. All are very broadly installed malware or botnet. And but the question is not only which of them would be most popular, but it's also about partnerships. So with Emotet, it wasn't only about the botnet; it was actually the next stage payloads that were very severe because they had partnerships with some of the top ransomware families. And so I think the question is both about the distribution of the botnet, but also what the next stage malware will be, and which of them will be able to distribute some of the top, say, ransomware like Ryuk and others. So I guess we'll have to wait and see which of them takes the lead.
Right. And that's a really good point, too, kind of about the partnership aspect of it. I know, for instance, we've seen TrickBot being used to deploy further ransomware and other types of malware as well. And we've seen a lot of really interesting partnerships between different malware variants. And as you mentioned, Emotet, the recent takedown of Emotet has had a very interesting shaping of the malware landscape now, and also kind of we've seen a couple of other similar takedown efforts and arrest efforts, including with eGregor and other ones. So do you think that, can you talk a little bit more about these partnerships and how they continue to really shape the cybersecurity malware landscape?
Yeah, I guess many threat groups learned that they can't be, say, full stack with the entire tech chain. So each group or each individual has their own added value. So it could be the distribution, right? So it could be, I'm the best at sending many emails, right? I have the mailing lists and I can send many emails. Someone else would have the technique on how to make people click the link or open the malicious document. And another would have the technique on how to actually then install the malware. From there, lateral movement is something else. Getting the initial intelligence about the network is something else, and eventually the part that does the damage is another is another thing. And we know that in many attack chains we do have separate people or groups for each of these parts. So with Emotet, this was both the emails and the initial payload or the botnet, but then it would sometimes move on to TrickBot to do the lateral movement, and then say to Ryuk as the ransomware. So in some cases it's just they as a service model, so that the groups don't necessarily have to know each other, but in many cases the cooperation is so tight that we have to assume that there's something there behind the scenes, that these groups actually communicate and complete each other's steps in the attack chain.
Right. I was going to ask, when you have those types of, attack chain operations where multiple strains of malware are being used, what are you seeing there in terms of, is it usually one group who is using an as a service model, as you mentioned before? What's kind of the benefits of groups who are working together? How might they kind of split up the ensuing profit, and how does that work really on the back end?
So I can't really comment on the back end and how they would split the revenue, and it also varies. So in some cases they would split, in other cases they would just pay for the service, and it doesn't matter if they actually got the money from the victim eventually or not. And I guess that's also part of whether it's as a service or an actual collaboration and joint venue. So, but by the way, in some cases, it's just we even see it with some APT groups that they would use for parts of the attack chain. They would use malware as a service, and it could be just to save on the time and resources in order to create this part of the attack. But it also could be for the smoke screen, or so that researchers won't be able to understand who the attackers are because they're using generic tools. So we are seeing all these types of cooperations or collaborations between different groups, but it's not only cyber criminals, it's also APTs.
Right. And regardless, this is not a good thing for the victims, right? I mean, this is that is innovation kind of happening across the sphere there on the cyber criminal side of things. So not great for different businesses who are dealing with these attacks, for sure.
Yes, but there is also a bright side, because especially mentioning APTs, if they use the same tools used by cyber criminals, maybe these are sometimes tools that are also easier to detect and to block.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point, for sure. Now, I did want to mention the ongoing pandemic. We've been living with COVID-19 for for a while now, and cyber criminals have certainly kept up with that. Unfortunately, they've been updating their TTPs and lures to really tap into the different themes that we've seen with the pandemic, as well as really the emotions just on the side of victims. So how have you seen the cyber criminal space evolve over the past year to leverage the pandemic, as well as kind of this shift that we've had to remote work?
Yeah, so I think it's mostly about, as you just said, about remote work and remote users, and how to target them, or to benefit from the fact that they are not necessarily behind the organization's security, or that there are more ways to connect remotely to a network. So it applies both to the employees, but also sometimes to the threat actors. And of course, the fact that everything was happening so fast necessarily means that that at least in some organizations there were holes in the security, if any. So what we've been seeing is more and more vulnerabilities and exploits for different VPN clients. That's one important thing. But also more and more attacks on RDP, on Remote Desktop Protocol. And going back to ransomware, actually in 2020, most of the ransomware attack did not even start with emails. They started with exploitation of RDP vulnerabilities. So it means that threat actors are indeed understanding that there's a new attack. It's not really a new attack vector, but one that is more robust now and more vulnerable than in the past.
Yeah, and that's interesting because I feel like RDP, like that is something that is an attack vector that we've seen for a while now. So given that, what are your top security practice recommendations for companies who are continuing to deal with the struggles of remote work, whether it is kind of securing RDP or VPNs or some of the other attack initial vectors you had mentioned there?
Well, threat actors exploit vulnerabilities in both technology and in people. So I split my answer into one for the technology part is making sure, of course, to do security patches. And for the human being part or the human error part is doing awareness, cybersecurity awareness to employees. It's super important and in many cases neglected. But of course, doing patches and security awareness, we can't really cover all the attack vectors this way. It's just impossible. And there are people who are dedicated to it, security researchers, security companies like Check Point and others. And we make sure to also understand all this threat landscape and to cover it in our products. So it's also, of course, very important to also apply appropriate security solutions.
Great. Those are definitely important pieces of advice. So, Maya, thank you so much for coming on to Threat Post Now to talk about some of the biggest cybercrime trends you're seeing.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Great. And to all of our viewers, thank you again for tuning in to Threat Post Now. This is Lindsay Welch, once again with Maya Horowitz with Check Point. And be sure to catch us on our next episode. Thank you.